everyone. Thank you for joining our wonderful panel, Breaking the Banking Bias, with our international panel of women. I would like to introduce our panelists, but first give you a little update on what's going to happen today. So the webinar itself is 45 minutes. We're going to go through a series of questions with the female panelists, and we're going to touch on first the industry itself and the current gender gaps that exist and how that impacts many of us and the current challenges faced by this industry and others as well. And then I'd like to move on to personal experiences from the panelists themselves as female leaders in banking. And throughout, we're going to explore themes such as unconscious bias, imposter syndrome, and where we're seeing issues that still persist today. Finally, we'd like to turn it over to the customer experience beyond the organization and really discuss how that actually impacts them and how we create experiences that build trust. So first, before we get started, I would love to introduce this wonderful panel and thank everybody for joining us. So we've got Venice, who is a PhD management engineering at Polytechnical School at Sao Paulo University in Brazil. She's also got a master's in psychology and a master's in gender and technology at Leibniz University in Hanover, Germany. She co-founded the first international women's university in Germany with 900 women around the world. And she's worked as a financial psychologist and a researcher of human technology interaction for over 20 years. She's currently the president and co-founder of Elas Bank, the first fintech focused on financial services for women. Thank you and welcome to our panel. Then I'd like to introduce Sasha. Sasha is president of MasterCard in Canada. In this role, she's responsible for all aspects of Canadian operations. And since joining in 2004, she's held leadership roles in key regions across the globe. Most recently, she was EVP of services for Asia Pacific. And from 2016 to 18, she was the head of the Nordic and Baltic division. She is passionate about bringing the best out of colleagues, partners, and customers, advancing opportunities for women, and most importantly, of living and leading with authenticity. Love that. Thank you
for having me.
Anastasia is next. Anastasia started her career in investment banking and has since worked in financial services and real estate in New York City, as well as a travel startup in Italy. She then moved to the UK and earned her MBA degree at Oxford, focusing on strategy, entrepreneurship, and fintech. Post-university, she joined Barclays and is now the head of Rise London, working closely with entrepreneurs to support the ecosystem of innovators who are working on shaping the future of financial literacy for women. Sorry, shaping the future of finance, but outside of work, that is one of her passions, improving the financial literacy of women. Okay, thank you for joining us, Anastasia. Last but not least, we have Karen, and she works for TD, one of North America's top banks, and she is head of experience design. I have to say, we work very closely with TD as one of our customers, and they have been recognized globally by many, many organizations for receiving awards in their digital experiences. And she's part of that team. She's part of designing digital experiences, and she delivers business and customer results by really focusing on the future possibilities, pushing the boundaries of innovation, and thriving in complex environments for global organizations. She is an accomplished strategic design thinker with experience leading, building, and mentoring multidisciplinary cross-functional teams. On her free time, Karen loves spending time with her family, playing tennis, reading fiction, and telling stories through painting and collage. Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us, Karen. What an incredible panelist of inspiring leaders today. So I'd love to get started. Thanks again for joining us, and thanks to the audience who's here today. Feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A. We will save some time at the end for questions, but we may even tackle some during the discussion. So let's just dive into the gender gap right now and what that looks like in financial services. In banking, the gender gap really reflects, what's happening overall in the industry and beyond, with an even split between men and women at entry level that actually declines as women climb the corporate rungs. When you get to C-suite, you have less than 20 women at the C-suite level, 20% at the C-suite level, and only 4% visible minority females. So it's pretty staggering. Now, during COVID, the demands on women have really escalated, but recognition has not, according to McKinsey. So, 2 years into the pandemic, women are more burned out than ever. And more are actually leaving the workforce across the world. I read a stat recently that the average woman takes on an extra 4 hours and 20 minutes of unpaid labor outside of work, just in their household duties. So, despite all of this, female leaders are stepping up to support not only their families, but their employees' well-being, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, but that work isn't always getting recognized, unfortunately. And companies risk losing the very leaders they need right now. So it's hard, hard to imagine organizations navigating the pandemic and building inclusive workplaces if this work is not truly prioritized. So with that, I've been talking a lot. I'd love to just dive into some of the questions. So Sasha, why don't we start with you, if you don't mind unmuting yourself. The first question I have is, how has the financial services industry evolved? And specifically, if you could touch on where have we moved the dial?
Sure, I'm happy to start with from a MasterCard perspective, and then I'll delve into financial services more specifically. We sit at the intersection of financial services and technology, and so I think it's interesting to see where MasterCard has gone. I feel pretty privileged when I think about the teams that I work with and sit on and lead. From a Canada leadership perspective, my leadership team is 70% women. I sit on a North America leadership team, which is 50% women. And our management committee is 25% women globally. And so I think what you can see there is a direct, on one hand, really positive traction, but also a bit of a direct reflection of what we see happening in the world, that as remits get bigger and broader and more senior, we do see a lesser representation of women. That being said, I think this is a conversation about how have we evolved in addition to where we need to go. So that situation for MasterCard is very different now than it would have been 5 or 10 years ago. So I'm really proud and encouraged by that. I think if I flip to financial services, and I'm going to give my view because we work with a lot of financial institutions, but my fellow colleagues on the panel that are in the financial institutions themselves will probably have another perspective to add. I think there is something around payments that is inherently special and specific for women and gender balance. And so the reason I say that is if you look at financial institutions generally in Canada, you shared some stats, but I think the Canadian Bankers Association says there's about 37% of women in senior management roles and 49% at middle management roles across banks. But if I look at payments specifically in Canada, the head of all the head of all the networks, MasterCard, Visa, Amex, Payments Canada isn't a network, but a significant player in payments, all led by women. If I look across the banks and name sort of significant banks, RBC, CIBC, BMO, TD, President's Choice, National Bank, Rogers, the payments areas of those banks are all headed by women. And so my question is always why? And I think there's something in payments that is specifically very human. It's something we all do. It's a daily interaction. It impacts our lives in terms of how we purchase, who makes purchase decisions. And I think there's something special there about why women are kind of rising to the top. So I'm very excited about that. What I would say to your specific question, Janine, about that's how we have evolved. Where do we have to go? I don't think that rise of women in payments is necessarily reflective of broader financial institutions. And maybe I'd turn to some of my colleagues on the panel to share their views on financial institutions more broadly.
Thank you. It certainly sounds like an anomaly in the industry. Anastasia, I know when we had spoken earlier, you said that your experience might have been a little different. Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. Well, first, I think Sasha's spot on. It is an anomaly, and that's very, very good to hear. In my personal experience, I mean, so I started out in investment banking, as you kindly mentioned in the beginning, and that investment banking is, I started out with Merrill Lynch, and that was in 2006, and that was kind of the time where there was still quite a lot of traditional banking aspects, and Merrill Lynch was still kind of more traditional in the sense of what you would expect traditional IB to look like. And there were very, very few women around in general. And specifically when it came to like things like traders or people who were actually dealing with clients, so most of them were, well, what you would expect them to look like. But I mean, in that space, actually, just because we were all kind of working so hard, we had such good camaraderie, I didn't feel that I was specifically singled out for being a woman, but it definitely, I definitely didn't look like most of what the room would look like. It was mostly white guys in suits. So there's definitely a difference there. But also, the other thing to point out is I worked essentially full time for Merrill Lynch during my undergraduate study. I was doing school full time and worked. So I was also quite young. So there was quite a lot of quite a lot of separation for me personally. But even then, since then, having worked in the financial industry, most of my colleagues tend to be men. I am currently in a position where in Rise, actually, we're very fortunate. We have something north of 80% of people on the innovation team who are women. So it's really been a complete change around. And I don't know if, Sasha, to your point, maybe that's the difference, that it's more of an innovative product, or maybe it's a team that's more open to change, but we somehow managed to bottle this magic in our team, and it's really nice to see women leading powerful things. But historically speaking, I would say it's been 30%, and especially also going to the MBA as well. I mean, finance in general and an MBA attracts 33% if you're lucky of women.
Yeah, I found the same experience with myself when I did my MBA.
Yeah.
But I'd love.
Fintech is even worse. Fintech is even worse, because the intersection of the STEM field, which does not attract a lot of women originally, and then it's an intersection of finance, and you bring those two together, and there's like 3 women for the entire industry.
and that's actually the perfect segue to turn it over to Venice, because leading fintech, I'd love to hear what are the trends you're seeing around this gender gap, and what has been your experience?
Well, thinking about what are saying Sasha and Anastasia, I think what are the main challenges that women leaders face in the fintechs is not a unique point or several points. It's specific and personal challenges. Several challenges are faced by women in leadership positions in every company. We do not exist for men in the same proportion. To meet this challenge, first, I think we need to understand the role of women in the innovative ecosystem. First point. I think second, we must admit that each person is different and has her own history with individual experiences. And that gives more or less challenge for this person in the position. For example, I will say that I have 3 children living in a developed country. So to be the leader of a bank here is not the same as being the leader in North America and without any children. So we have to consider the personal data from each woman and the conditions that they are getting in the ambient they are conducting the company, to understand what are these challenges. Thirdly, I think we need to consider that is what's our business, what is our purpose, and how that affects the type and intensity of challenges that we face in leading fintechs. This is important because as the chains of leading a fintech depend on the business, founding a payment or a credit fintech is not the same as creating an entire ecosystem for women that offers a complete pool of bank service, lending, payment services, sales services, financial planning, and automated investment services as our bank do. What I think is the most common and most important challenge in running for the women in fintechs are they are missing funding to lead the business to the future. So that's the most important and common point that we can share to each other. And we have to consider this as our principal and more important obstacle.
Yeah. I really like what you said about, it's not just focusing on one area, but the whole ecosystem around each woman as an individual. Great point. Let's take it over to Karen. I would love to hear, some of your experiences and challenges you faced, particularly since the onset of COVID.
Yeah, I mean, okay. There's a lot of things here. So let me start a little bit further back. So, and I'm a designer working in a financial institution. So I'm a little bit unique. However, before TD, I worked at IBM. So I worked with a lot of technologists. And so I guess I've always been in tech, but in a sort of an area that works with tech, but not necessarily specifically tech. And so I think with COVID, yeah, your stat is bang on, and I think the stress for women has been higher with and I shouldn't say the majority of women, or I shouldn't generalize. I mean, I'm very lucky. My husband has always been 50%, caregiver along with me. But I know that there are different situations for everybody, but the stress of the home life, the when your kids are sick and whatnot, and being at home, working at home while during COVID with your kids at home has been challenging. I've seen that with my team. And I think organizations have to really consider that and think about what the needs of their employees and their colleagues are. If they need to take a leave, if they need to do something that is personal, they need time, we need to give them that space. If I think about, my team members, the young designers that I work with, that I mentor right now, I see patterns that, that I saw in myself as a younger designer. What I do see now that I think is a little bit different, I do see more female mentorship, more female leaders taking that on with younger designers. As a young designer myself, I didn't have that mentorship 20 years ago. I've been in this industry for 25 years and I didn't have that mentorship. So I think organizations are absolutely really trying to move the dial through their, women in leadership programs, their networking events. Also, even I think about quarterly reviews with my team members, giving them the space and time to talk about themselves, talk about their achievements, because their managers might not even know really what they're doing. Everybody's really busy. There's a lot going on. So I think it's really helping to focus on them, what they're doing, and really sort of taking that approach and really trying to help move that dial. I think one person at a time, but at an organization level as well.
Great point. And I like what you said too about women helping women. It's like we've been there. So really leading the charge yourself. This is a great opportunity to actually touch on what your organizations are doing. Are there actual strategies that you see your organizations putting in place to specifically break that banking bias or that gender bias? Or do you have anything you could share on that front? This is to all of you, sorry. If anyone wants to weigh in.
I'll start. I mean, we do have women in leadership programs and networking events. We have sort of informal coffee chats where a mentor and a mentee can sign up and they get matched and they have chats. And I've had some really good conversations with younger younger future leaders, I would say that again have sort of are at a point where they want to move on and they're not exactly sure. So kind of giving them that help, that confidence in those conversations. But I think there should be more. And I think there should be more formal mentoring programs. And I'm not just saying from an executive level to a lower level. I think all levels should be mentoring. So an intermediate person could be mentoring a junior person, or, I mean, the different levels. I think everybody can offer those types of mentorships through programs. But I feel like actual programs are the way to help with this. And then one thing that I've noticed in actually I was talking about with my daughter about a women in leadership networking events. I think it's great to network and for there to be that time and opportunity to meet executives or partners or whatnot, and get to know them. But I also feel like there should be events with men in there as well, because I think I don't think they should just be exclusively women. I think that there can be, but I also feel like there should be men in there, because they're the future as well, and they are going to help along with us to move that dial and move that needle.
I absolutely agree, and it benefits the whole organization, not just women.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Anyway, Sasha, you look like you want to say something, but you're on.
Sure, I'm happy to add in just a couple additional things that MasterCard is doing, and then some questions that are sort of on my mind on how we actually make this change sort of permanent and scalable. So just from a MasterCard perspective, we have pay equity. So every woman earns the same as every man. So there's a solid base there. We're focused on, obviously, from a recruitment perspective, making sure our slates are very balanced. We have a really active return to work program. And many of these programs all of these programs that I'm describing actually are global in nature, which I think is really powerful given the different situations that women find themselves in around the world. And so our return to work program is for women who have taken time off from the workforce in order to raise a family or deal with family obligations, to help them come back in at a level and a skill set that is commensurate and helps advance their careers. We also have women who lead programs and a women's leadership network. I think, Karen, though, your point is a really key one, and it's always a question that sits in my mind. Is I think certainly my company and many other companies do a really good job of having women help women, but I think what we need to do a better job of is have organizations help women, and that does mean making sure that we have allyship and support. I have a ton of young women who come and will ask questions and reach out for help and for sponsorship and mentorship, which I'm more than happy to do. But my question always is, who else are you reaching out to? And it seems easier and more natural for them to reach out to a woman leader, but really to be successful and to get to those next level, they've got to have an equal network of both women and men. And so the one question for me that hasn't been resolved, and I think we need to keep chipping at it, is how do we make these programs not just for women by women, but for organizations and by organizations?
Well said. Thank you for sharing.
I 110% agree with that. I've heard of organizations in the financial industry that have done kind of International Women's Day events, which is great, but apparently men have been turned away, which I think is a completely wrong narrative. I think it's so important. I'm not looking for a separate room where women can gather. I'm personally looking to be included in the same thing. Like it's equality is about being together and doing it on an organizational level. So I completely agree with that. I think that there does need to be a support kind of from top down as well in organizations to drive that change and drive that mindset.
I think you're absolutely right.
And I think the flip side, if I can just add in, is I think for all of those senior women who mentor, we should be mentoring our male colleagues and our male junior colleagues as well, because as they come up, having their worldview and their perspective of leadership, partnership, teamwork also be more inclusive will help not only them, but it will help the teams they lead, the companies they choose to lead. And so it really does need to be bi-directional.
I totally agree.
Definitely.
Go deeper in this question about thinking, how can we help women to be part of the financial system together in the purpose of learning and developing technology for women, considering their cycle life, for example. Bank has worked in developing simulators to understand how does the way of life of women are creating financial gaps for them. For example, when you consider menstruation and reproductive life, you have to take in mind that it gives to women an extra costs for life. So you have to calculate it and made women understand how much money they have to save for paying for these expenses, and also involve the family and the men in the propose of saving money for paying for that. For example, we calculated that woman expense in the daily life almost $30,000 by paying for menstruation and reproductive life just to have one baby. So if you have 3 children, you need to save $1,000 just to pay for the girls to have tampons and products of menstruation. And so we have to think in the woman life, considering every steps of their daily life of the day. What are the women doing? If the woman is alive and living without a husband, she is paying more taxes for the lives because she has to pay for school for 3 children. But a man that is living alone, he pay the same amount of taxes for over the salary. It's not something that we have to not pay attention. We have to consider that calculating how does it cost for women, how have to be the salary and how they have to save and how much money they have to save and invest for paying for the lives. Otherwise, we'll be in the poverty, even when we have lots of money. So that's the work the Alice Bank is doing. We are managing each woman's financial in a unique way, individually, and as a sample, as used in a self-driving car, for example. We are letting the women to understand that what are their lives, what they need, how much money they need, how they should deal with this money. Why it's important to save money and invest. Not only to be rich, but also for paying for the normal life. That's how we are working. Together with the society, we are connecting to many women's groups, women from country for rural areas, women for security, groups of women that are organizing financial education and asking them, what do you need for living? And how do we translate this in data science? To produce services that are based in technology and can help women organize their financial life.
Wow, what your bank is doing is incredible. I feel like we could spend the whole session talking about it. But what I'm going to do right now is actually first invite the audience to ask questions. Feel free to pop it in the Q&A and we'll get to them. I also wanted to pivot a little bit and turn it over to the role of gender in defining customer experience. And, you know, when you think about customer experience at the end of the day, it's really rooted in the concept of trust. And one of the best ways to engender that trust is to make your customers feel welcome no matter what their gender orientation or ethnicity is. And we all know that in an age where customer data is central to the brand experience, a great customer experience is about harnessing the intelligence of that data and the analytics, you know, in a way that you mentioned, Benice, to really create customer interactions and engagements that really address their unique one-to-one needs. One of the reasons I would say that bias exists in the way society has evolved. And, you know, historically, there have been more men in the workplace and, you know, they've been responsible for providing for their families. One could argue that it's actually influence the way customer experiences are designed today because of that history. And so I wanted to actually come back to you, Venice, and really say, talk more about that customer experience. So how would you say that banking bias affects customer engagement and interactions and impacts trust with them? And what is the cost of doing nothing?
Well, I think we have empathy at all. We are talking the language of the woman, things that maybe you have thinking about, but never realized that these things are important and should be heard. That is what we are doing. Our products are mainly based in the robo advisor that automatize the whole process, letting the woman invest easily without having any knowledge of finance. If they don't have technology, they can also invest the same way and planning and organizing their finance. But to get customer connecting to the bank, we have to be closer to the society, in the base of the society. We have to go to the people. We are going, for example, we are traveling to Amazon and talking to the women that are fisher there. What are their needs? Why they are selling their products for a so low price when they, for example, they are selling 1 kilogram of fish by 15 cents. But I buy the same product here in São Paulo, the capital of Brazil, by two reais, for example. So why they don't sell directly to me? What are the problems that they have to connect to a bank and using an e-marketing to sell their product direct to the consumer? So we're thinking about that. We are constructing an e-commerce just for women to sell products of women and connecting professionals of different kinds. Using Elas Bank core to pay for the services, for example. This is also, this is in this moment in construction, but we are thinking that we have to give the clients an entire experience of services in finance, an entire ecosystem of services, not only payment, not only credit, but a security that is considering the middle age of the woman's life, that is 82 years, not the middle age of the man, that is 70 years. So we are connecting to the companies that are creating products specifically for women and trying to connect all these products in the same platform in a male ecosystem.
Thank you. Very interesting. I'd like to turn it over to Anastasia. How have you seen customer expectations evolve, particularly, since the onset of big tech and just the whole data economy that we live in? And really, what can the banking sector learn from other industries?
So what I've noticed in fintech is, of course, with especially kind of the millennial and Gen Z generations, there is much more focus on personalization. So more and more people want applications or their products to be almost custom designed for them. And so there's definitely a big push in the market of fintech for these kind of applications and platforms for customers to use. And I think that's an opportunity for banks to potentially leverage to custom create something that's more focused around women. I would love to see more financial products that are designed with women in mind specifically, just because I think there's a big opportunity there. And to your point around, what are institutions missing out on if they're not addressing this? And well, frankly, like half of the population. One of the fintech companies I was speaking it to, they were focusing on investments, and there was kind of like a pool investment idea. And they always had mostly men essentially they had like 25% women engagement maybe on their platform. And all they've done, they didn't change any of their products or what they were doing in terms of offering, but all they've done is the way that they've positioned it in terms of marketing and the way they changed their outreach. They were able to get up to 50-50 split of men and women on the platform organically just by the way that they communicated and presented the same products. So I think there's a lot of kind of things they do. One being the custom products, but two, also the way that financial institutions communicate to women. And one of the reasons I'm really passionate about the financial inclusion for women is because I think women on a whole globally are underserved by financial institutions for these reasons. I think women oftentimes self-select out of things because they feel like financial products or finance is too male-focused. There's too much dry jargon. But I've personally done studies across the UK on women in finance and their engagement with it. And more than 50% of the women that I've surveyed have said that they just outsource their financial management to a man in their life. And I mean, that's great if you have a great relationship and if that's a decision you make. But in the same group, only 10% of those women actually wanted to go about it that way. So I think there's a lot to be done in terms of including women on this journey and educating them to make sure that that split of financial decisions in the household or labor is really a choice that you make versus something that you have to kind of fall back on. So yeah.
No, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I'd like to turn it over to Sasha and hear about what MasterCard has done to really target consumers, build inclusivity amongst their customers. I mean, I recently saw had a transgender campaign that was phenomenal. I'd love to hear more about what your organization.
Sure. I think starting a little bit more broadly than just gender, the key to customer experience, I hope you'd agree, Janine, is understanding customer needs and segment needs. And so we have taken a really thoughtful approach to identify a few key segments and dig into that. And so just as a couple of examples, you mentioned our True Name Card, which is an opportunity for non-binary and transgender individuals to put their chosen name on their card, which is an incredibly powerful experience. If you present one way and your card has a name that is not reflective of how you define yourself, it's a painful, humiliating, challenging experience every time you use your card, which could be up to multiple times a day. And so we're really pleased globally to have this available, and in Canada specifically with BMO, Bank of Montreal, and I hope that other financial institutions will think about the value of this, because this shouldn't be a differentiator in many ways. This should be a sort of a common experience that everyone can avail themselves of. But that's just one.
Oh, I think you're frozen.
No.
Sasha, you're frozen, so you may have to turn off your video. Hopefully she can reconnect soon. So maybe we'll go over to you, Karen, while she gets back on.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to other financial services organizations when it comes to designing these more conscious experiences that are tailored to the individual?
Yeah, I think it goes back to both what Anastasia and Venice were saying, and even Sasha, around really, really understanding your customers' unmet needs. And how we do that is we have a very robust research team that's embedded in the design team. And we do a lot of primary research when we're looking at designing things. So we'll go out, we'll do interviews, we'll do contextual inquiries, online forums, diary studies, to really understand their unmet needs, so that we're actually designing things that they're going to use and that they need. So through that primary research, we then conceptualize an experience, we prototype it, and then we test it. We have a lab on our floor where we do it. Well, right now we're doing it online, but as we go back into the office, and prior to COVID, we had a lab, we had it through the glass where we'd observe them actually experiencing something. we don't just ask, we want to see them using it so that we can gather those insights. Now, we always recruit a diverse group of people so that we can really focus and understand across the board. And then the other side of that I think is really important too is that our team is a diverse group of people that come from all backgrounds, all abilities, so that we can actually understand, we can design and test, and then understand those that our customer set as well. So really, really getting to the human aspect of it and really empathizing and really using our design thinking to get to the root of what their needs are.
That's really great advice, human-centered design, essentially. We actually have several questions that have come in. So I'd like to spend some time, because we're almost out of time, and I know this discussion is going so well, we may go a couple minutes over if that's okay with all of you. Our first question is actually directed to Sasha. And the role of women, so many women leading payment services, is notable. Are women generally more involved in household expenditure than their male counterparts? And is this a reality?
A simple yes. And so what's really interesting here is there is a bit of a dichotomy of who potentially owns the funding and who influences the funding. And so we see a ton of research that shows that women actually are, whether you want to call it the chief procurement officer or the chief purchasing officer of the home. The amount of decisions that women influence is up to 2/3 of the nation's economy. And this is both true for Canada and the US, based on statistics. I'm sure it's relatively similar in other markets as well. But that influence that women have over the direction of a family's spending is not debatable. I think what is debatable is kind of who controls the funds, but the influence of women is profound.
Funny, I always call myself the CEO of my own household.
There you go.
I really feel like managing a house of 3 kids, like I could do anything at this stage. Let's move on to the next question. With traditional family roles evolving, greater sharing of family household responsibilities between partners, do you see the work-life balance objective for men and women becoming more aligned? Great question. Anyone want to weigh in? So I know in some cultures, I remember reading this story about a place in Japan where women were taking on more work because they were working full time, but they also were still expected to do laundry and take care of all the kids. And what ended up happening over time is they stopped having kids. And the population of this one particular city in Japan is actually on the decline because they're just saying, no, like, why has society not caught up to like the new standard? And like everyone's still expecting us to do it all, and it's just impossible. Anyone else want to weigh in?
I think in Brazil, we have a distribution that women works 21 hours more a week than men in housework. They are the principal responsible for taking care of the children, and they also are the principal responsible for giving financial education for the children, but they don't have the access to the finances as the men have. They have less credit and less as is they are evaluated in the higher risk for credit than men. Women are expected to work 8 hours a day and 4 or 6 hours at house, cleaning, taking care of the babies. And in Brazil, it's not many common not to have babies. So just in the big cities, women are choosing not to have babies. They are realizing that it's not a big business to be a professional and take care of the children. Many companies are giving more money for women that have babies, but to not lose the worker because of the maternity. but there are not changes in the family relationship. The distribution of housework is still the principal task of women, and even taking care of elderly and the children, and keeping and even deciding how to pay for the expenses at house. So I think we have three journal now for women, and it's for the majority of us. Women has more higher education than men in Brazil, 4 years more in the medium, but they have 30% less salary than men for the same task. Still. So I think it's much a local question than anything. We can see that in North America, the things are very different. Women are more independent. They are deciding not to have babies, and they are prioritizing their careers. But in Brazil, women still think that having being a mother is more important than have a career. So it's like this.
Those are some staggering statistics that you referenced. Very interesting. It's scary.
The Brazilian government, the IBGE, house researchers that they are asking at many houses, how do you live like that? How do you do that? How many years do you work? How many years of study do you have? It's official of the government.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, there's so many questions coming up. Another one we have is, what advice would the panelists give for a young woman in fintech who sits on an all-male team, specifically in building camaraderie and establishing credibility? As a former MasterCard employee, there's a lack of diversity in my new role, and it's been a very novel experience for me. Wow. Who wants to touch on that? I'm staring at you, Anastasia.
I was gonna say, I feel like I could do this. No, I'm happy to take that on. Well, one, I mean, obviously you very much deserve a place on that team because, well, they picked you and you're on the team. So definitely make sure that you don't have any of the imposter syndrome creeping in, because you very much deserve to be there. And the other thing is, I think you could also almost even turn it to your advantage, is that you already stand out. So just make sure that you have your work speak for yourself. Definitely, if you have opinions or thoughts of how things could be run differently, I wouldn't shy away to not speak to it just because you're the only woman in the room. Again, just don't think of yourself as the only woman, just think of yourself as one person on the team, if that helps. But I do think, again, like this could be a platform from which you could shine. So just make sure the work speaks for it. Use it as a powerful place to speak from versus a place that could potentially put you down, if you let it. But I'm hoping that your team is very supportive as well. I really would hope so. And if not, then I personally would bring that up and I would say, look, I feel like this is the situation, and hash it out.
I totally agree with you to use it to your advantage and to actually bring that different perspective. And I think it'll be such an added bonus to the team to really hone in on that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I completely agree. And yeah, from your points where you for yourself, Karen, have a very diverse team from diverse backgrounds, I think that is so valuable in terms of, especially when you're starting to build a fintech. I'm assuming you guys are quite small as a team in general, and having that diverse perspective will make such a big difference in the product or the solution that you put out into the world.
Totally.
Amazing. Now I want to ask Sasha a question, because I think this plays into what she was talking about before, the idea of coaching and mentoring. One of our audience members has asked, I love this idea of coaching and mentoring both men and women. Have you done anything specific for people managers to promote inclusivity in their team?
I guess I would say two things. One, I think the notion of inclusivity, and hopefully you heard that from the person that was asking the question as a former MasterCard colleague, hello, whoever you are. that is a core value of MasterCard. And so I think people very quickly realize if you're at MasterCard, you need to buy into that. Otherwise, you're not in the right spot. That being said, we do have activities and plans and initiatives to make sure that that continues to come to life. So for example, we have a number of leadership programs. One of them is Women Who Lead, but we also have a Future Leaders program. And so that Future Leaders program is gender agnostic, and it is designed for people who will be our future leaders. And it does talk about both, and I hate this terminology, but until someone gives me a better way to describe it, I'm going to keep using it, kind of the hard skills of leadership, but also the soft skills. And so, those skills around inclusivity fall under that soft skill category. And we do talk about them holistically so that if you are going to be a future leader at MasterCard, you're thinking about both sides of leadership.
Thank you. Well said. I think we have time for maybe one more question. I'm seeing a lot of, really nice comments come in as well. But let's tackle this one because I know some of us have faced it. It was around the concept of like actual discrimination in the workplace. And, have any of you actually faced it to your knowledge? And what did you do when that happened? And how did you actually overcome it? I mean, some of it is very unconscious, right? Like you may not even realize that it's happening, hence the name of this webinar. But has there been, any examples anyone's open to sharing?
I think many times the discrimination is not so clear for women and also for men. I would say I would talk about a research I have done 20 years ago when I tried to understand how high there were the taxes of DORT, osteomuscular diseases in women working in technology. And they have 3 times more cases in women doing the same work in the same middle time that was 29 minutes, seconds. But women have 3 times more diseases. We was hearing many discussions about women are not so strong. Women have menstruation and hormones that can explain they are weaker than men, and so they are being sick. And I do not get this discourse, and I decided to research and understand what was going on and why does it happen. So I was hearing the communications between clients and the company, and I understand that many times woman was treated in a softer way. For example, oh my dear, could you please give me the information for this? And this made the woman behavior in a different way than men. They expend much more time giving information. And when they give information, the other side, the client asks more information. And when they ask more information, the woman try more data and more data and more data. And at the same time, the men did 1/3 of the work. So I showed with qualitative data that women do 3 more times doing exactly the same thing than men. What we have to think about this, that discrimination is the part that we cannot see. What we're seeing are the bias. And then we can work over this. We can say no, we can go to the law, we can ask for protection, but the part that is damaging the relationship of men and women is that one that we are not seeing. And
I think that's a really critical point, Vanessa. I think, I'm pleased to be able to say I don't feel like I have been, the victim of overt discrimination, although that exists, and we need to continue to use all of the legal frameworks and judicial frameworks we have to make sure we push that out of the system. But this notion of covert discrimination, things that are quieter, like you have a seat at the table, but is your voice heard? Are you talked over? Are you mansplained? Like all of these things those are the ones that we need to chip away at because they are under the surface and they create rot in the system. And until we get rid of that, I don't think that we will have a true level of equality. And I think that one, frankly, is perhaps more pervasive because it's harder to detect, it's harder to call out, and it's harder to solve.
Yeah, and I think that when you're facing that, it's hard to articulate it. It's hard to actually pinpoint it, as you're saying, Sasha. And I think it's hard to speak up, right? Because it's like, well, did they say that, or is that really happening? I would say the one thing that I think has changed, and I mean, I've seen this, I've talked to friends about it, is I think since the Me Too movement, I think sexual discrimination in the workplace has changed. I think before people didn't talk about that, people actually talk about it much more. So I think there is something that has changed because of that movement. I for the better, obviously. So I feel like, and I mean, I'm not saying that specifically to me, but I've heard things, and then just even the way people think about things, what might have happened before, and then they're like, this would never have happened now. So I think we've moved the dial on that a little bit, and I think there's change there. So I think that to me is quite interesting. I don't know if others have seen that as well or thought about that.
I think you're absolutely right, and I would actually say let's end it here because we're almost at time. You have all been incredible panelists, and your stories are inspiring, and you've left us all with some really great takeaways, some tips, some strategies, and your own insight. I'd like to thank all of you for attending and all of you amazing women on this panel. But also ask that you let everyone know where they can find you if they want to reach you. Is there the best way? Let's just go around the table. Sasha.
LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out.
Amazing.
Same.
I was gonna say, this is gonna be easy.
Anyone not LinkedIn? LinkedIn work for everybody? Myself included. So thank you all very much. And hopefully you got some value out of this. I certainly did myself. Take care.